be a talk about genetics. I call it Genetics 101. And some of you are probably old pros who could give this talk. For other people, it might be a refresher, and maybe for some people, it's something brand new. I think for a lot of people, they have heard a little bit of it, but they maybe have lingering questions. I just want to say, I have a lot of affection for Caitlin, who addressed me, as I do for many of the women and girls that I know. It's hard for me not to be here as somebody who really loves the people I work with. I'm not here as just somebody giving a lecture. And I think that's really the wonderful thing about these kind of conferences, okay? That's sort of my disclosure. So one of the things that a speaker has to do is we have to tell you what other stuff do we do besides being here. It's called a disclosure. So I'm part of the advisory board. It's unpaid. I work as an editor for a journal, and then I work in the Department of Public Health. But my main position is at this hospital called Massachusetts General Hospital. And so the purpose of this is it's kind of a talk for what I call the newbies as well as the pros. It's a general review of genetic topics, especially chromosomes. We'll talk about chromosome differences in Turner syndrome, the different types of genetic testing, and whether chromosomes predict the features. And my handout for this talk is the Turner syndrome booklet. Now, how many of you guys have that booklet? And if you don't, this is a chance to get it. You know, they sell it in the little bookstore. I helped, create the genetic section on it. It's got great little pictures. Because I think when you're watching a talk like this, you'll be thinking, oh, what did she say? What was that diagram she showed us? And I don't want you to think you have to be taking a whole lot of notes, because if you have the booklet, you'll find all this stuff in it, okay? So the thing that a speaker does is we like to acknowledge people when we give a talk. But I always show a mirror, because I need to acknowledge everybody here and all the people I've ever met with Turner syndrome, because it's you who teach me about Turner syndrome. I hardly teach you. You tell me what it's like to live with Turner syndrome. So the definition of Turner syndrome is that it's the presence of a normal X chromosome, and the absence, though, of the second X chromosome, or one that's missing or deficient. So you got one, and either the second one is either missing or just part of it is there. Everybody with Turner syndrome is female. Tremendous differences in appearance, short stature in most. And this is a big deal because people used to say everybody's short. Not true. And we use the expression reduced fertility. So to me, there's just incredible variation. If you talk to some fresh young medical student, they have this one image about Turner syndrome. Usually it's this horrible picture that came out of some medical book, right, from like 1950. It's a naked person. It's terrible. But women with Turner syndrome are like snowflakes, and they're all different. And you can walk around this place and say, I know that. We're all different here. And so it's not a cookie cutter syndrome. Everybody doesn't come out of the same cookie cutter template. So a lot of this is going to be kind of like going back to science class. We're going to talk about, sciencey stuff, chromosomes, microscopes, stuff that is like, this is what you did in science class. So how many people love science? Okay. How many people hate it? How many people get the willies just by saying science? Nervous laughter. Because I know it can be hard. I know somebody in my family who really hates science, so I'm going to try to make it kind of fun, all right? So this is sort of a complicated picture, but what it's trying to show you in the upper corner there is that thing that looks like a fried egg. That circle. I'm really sorry, I don't have a pointer. Yeah, thank you. No, see, the thing is that usually if I'm using my laptop, I can get it on the screen here, but for some reason it's not projecting on. Super, okay. So the thing up here that looks like a fried egg, that's called a cell. That's pretty easy. It's a round cell. And our body is made up of bazillions of them. In the center of the cell, it's called a nucleus. Now, in the nucleus, when you open it up, there are those little things. They look like caterpillars almost. Those are called chromosomes, all right? And when you open up a chromosome, when you expand it, it's like going from small, smaller. That's when you get all the DNA stuff, all right? So this is just sort of a diagram. And this is showing you even smaller. You keep breaking it down. You get the chromosome, you pull it apart, and you get down to the DNA. And what happens is What does DNA do? It makes protein. So this is what all this genetic stuff is about. It's about how much do you have, what don't you have, what are you making, and what aren't you making. So this is what we look at under a microscope. This is a chromosome, a set of chromosomes in a cell. Now we took away the cell, we took away the membrane, and this is actually what you can see under a microscope. And it's pretty amazing that people can make any sense of it. And in the olden days, people used to take a photograph of that, and with little tiny scissors, they would cut out each one of them and line it up. But now they can do it electronically. And you'll notice that they have kind of stripes. Some are dark, some are light. You'll notice some are big, some are small. And we can line them up. Now this is a male, and the total number is 46, lined up as pairs from 1 to 22, and there's an X and a Y in the lower right-hand corner. Can you see that, guys? I'm sorry I don't have my little pointer. There we go, circle there. And then this is a female. Again, 46, 23 pairs, 2 X's. And this is somebody who has Turner syndrome. So 45, just 1 X, okay? Now, just to pause, how many people have heard this basic talk so far? I hope everybody. Everybody? Is there anybody who says, oh my, thank you. Is there anybody who says, I've never heard
at the top, this little red line
cool,
right there.
thank you. There we go, great, thank you. Is there anybody who says, this is like new to me, I've never heard this? Okay, this is good, okay. And we write it, we have a way of writing it as 45X. So you know, Turner syndrome isn't inherited. This is one of the first things I hear from people. And every parent who has a child who's special in any way will say, did I give it to them? Did I drink too much Coca-Cola? Did I not have enough orange juice? You know, is it something that I did? And the answer is no, it's one of these things in life that just happens. So we know at conception we have an egg, which is really quite large compared to the sperm, which is quite tiny. And after fertilization happens, there's cell multiplication, and then there's organization. So again, here is a typical conception. There's 23 chromosomes in the typical egg, 23 chromosomes in the typical sperm. Put them together, it's like simple math. 23 is 46. But then in Turner syndrome, what has happened is you have 23 chromosomes and a sperm, 22. Can be either way. I've just used it as a sperm. And you get 45. Again, it's like math, okay? And so you have, the gender is a girl, but there's fewer in them, okay? Does that sound familiar? The notion that it's not 23, 23, it's 23 and 22. And people often say, well, was it the sperm? My husband's sperm? Was it my egg? And we can do research on it, but there's no practical reason for doing it. It could be either way. So this is a question that always comes up. You were asking me, what kind of chromosome type is most common? So I'm going to go in order. The most common type is 45X. That's simple one. 45, 1X. And almost half of the women have that. I won't ask you in the audience to tell me what kind you have or your daughters, but I bet some of you will say, yeah, that's me, all right, because that's the most common type. Now we're going to get a little bit fancier. Ready? Okay. These are the ones that we call mosaic. Mosaic means a mixture. So a mixture, and this is sort of the fancy genetic-y language. You can have 45X, and then you can have the typical 46XX. And your doctor might have told you, you have mosaicism with 46XX, okay? Or some people have 45X, and they can have something called triple X. Imagine that. It is, instead of missing an X, having 3 X chromosomes. Now, some women actually have X and Y, and if that is the case, it's not meant to think that you are part male. That's not it at all. It just means is that at some point in conception, there were maybe just a few cells that had a Y. It's a small number. The people who have this are female. They are oriented as women, but these few little Y-type chromosomes are there. And we call that mixed gonadal dysgenesis. And then there's a situation where the X chromosome, the second X is present, but it's shorter. We call that a deletion. And you could have a deletion of P or a deletion of Q. There's also a situation in which the X chromosome can form a ring. And people who have a ring chromosome are always mosaic. Then there's also something called an isochromosome, This thing is so uncommon, I'm not even going to mention it. There's also a situation where some people have these chromosome differences on X, and they really don't have Turner syndrome. If somebody were here at the meeting who had something called deletion of XQ, I would say you really don't have Turner syndrome. So what I try to do in a talk like this is not get too personal. But afterwards, if you want to ask me a question, we can talk about your chromosome type. You know, ideally, when you have Turner syndrome, you have a personal meeting with somebody like me, a counselor, a geneticist. How many people met with a geneticist at some point in their life? How many people did not? Do you think that makes it a little bit hard? I mean, sometimes the endocrinologist, the hormone doctor will say, well, let's talk about it. But I kind of think that what we do in genetics is this is our thing. We talk about these little things, the chromosomes. We try to draw pictures. And just to get it straight in your mind what's going on. So this is what we mean by a ring. And a ring means is that the X chromosome has a little missing part there, a little missing part there, and it fuses together. So it looks like a little ring. And as for all of these things, there are very different ways that the person can look. There's not a single standard appearance. And this is what we mean by an isochromosome. If anybody here has it, it means that you have two of these long arms. By the way, the X chromosome, forgive me for not explaining, there's a long arm called Q, a short arm called P. In the isochromosome, the person has two of the long arms. So this is something to talk about mosaicism. Mosaicism means a mixture. So a fertilized egg, a typical woman starts out as two X's. What can happen in mosaicism is one of those cell lines that has two X's loses an X, it just loses it. And the woman goes on to have some of her cells with XX and some of them with X. I can see your faces, you're thinking, wow, that's really interesting. How does that happen? It just does. You just lose the X. And a person goes on to be a mixture of 45X and 46XX. In some women, the 45X percentage is like 90%, and this is maybe 10%. In some women, it's the exact opposite. This might be 10%, and this might be 90%. I'm just going to pause because I can see your faces. I can tell this is kind of really different. And this is just a picture that I have. This is what we mean by a mosaic. This is a table I saw at Bed Bath & Beyond. This is something else I picked up online. And it's just to show you that mosaic means sort of a mixture. So if anybody here has had mosaicism, you probably know that your doctor, if you're my patient, we check more than one type of tissue. You know, so the standard thing is blood. We can also do a skin sample. We can also check cheek cells. We don't do heart and bone because you can't get in there to do that. If anybody was diagnosed by amniocentesis is actually a way of checking a fetus's skin cells. So you get sort of different percentages in those. If you don't have mosaicism, you might be really challenged by wondering what I'm talking about. But if you do have mosaicism, your doctor may have gone through some of this with you. So Turner syndrome features do vary to some degree with the chromosome type. And I said, sort of, sometimes, not a firm prediction, there's a wide spectrum, okay? It used to be thought that there was a clear correlation, but we've sort of dispelled that. So I love this picture because it shows you the many faces of Turner syndrome. See, these are some young ladies from different meetings, and you can look at them and say, well, I see some similarities, but I see a lot of differences. And this is a quote from the poet Maya Angelou, who said, "We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty." And so this means that I think women who have Turner syndrome, as they go through different stages and different ages, may look a little bit different at different ages. So again, how do we diagnose Turner syndrome? So maybe I'll do a little audience participation here. In the past, if there's anybody here who's, say, over 40 or 50 and there's not, it used to be done this old-fashioned way. We would do a swab of the cheek. We would look at it under a microscope, not for something fancy like the chromosomes, just for something called a bar body. And that's not adequate, but that's the way it used to be done. So one way of doing it is prenatally. There's something called CVS or amnio. Does anybody know if they were diagnosed prenatally? So a couple people were. Now, I assume everybody has at least had a blood chromosome analysis. Would that be right? A little show of hands? Blood? Okay. Anybody have a skin biopsy? Does anybody know if they've had their skin checked? Okay. And there's this new thing. So nobody in this room would have had it, but there's this new thing called non-invasive prenatal testing. This means that you can tell what's going on with the baby by checking the mother. Did you know that? So maybe you guys have had friends, or you read about it in the paper. You're checking the mother's blood for DNA that's floating around if she's carrying a fetus. Okay, so that's relevant for another discussion, but just to clue you in, all right? And this is just a little diagram to show you what a bar body looks like when you do a cheek cell. This is what amniocentesis, I know it looks kind of frightening, but you put a needle through the mother's abdomen into the amniotic sac. CVS is different. You sample through the cervix. A skin biopsy is something that I can do in the office. It's taking a little piece of skin using a tiny, tiny little gadget, looks like a little pen. Skin cells under the microscope look like this, and this is something fancier. So chromosome testing, special features. So mosaicism can be detected on the initial chromosome analysis, and there's this notion I've told you that there are different percentages. And one of the things that comes up is how low is too low? So what if you have 20%, 15%, 10%? What if you're 7%? Is that Turner syndrome? And we've noticed that when you're really low, like down by 15%, you don't have too many of the features. And then there's this idea of something called Y chromosome material. Now remember, Y does not mean male. Y does mean that you can have some of these chromosomes lingering from conception, and it does mean your doctor might have to do some studies to make sure you don't have anything related to that. We will repeat the karyotype in some older patients. So if somebody comes to me in my clinic, and on the chart it says Turner syndrome, but I can't find the actual report, I always repeat it. If somebody says to me, oh, my mom told me about it, and I can't find it, I always repeat it. Every once in a while, I mean, just a couple times, I've had people who've come in maybe with short stature, and they've said, oh yeah, they told me I had Turner syndrome, and I repeated the chromosome, and they didn't have it. It was just something that had been carried along for years. And so those are just different reasons, just to make sure somebody really has it. So every girl or woman with Turner syndrome must have a chromosome analysis to confirm the features that are observed. Girls and women with Turner syndrome may have a wide variety of physical differences, medical issues, and learning challenges. There's a wide spectrum of involvement. So for example, when we think about the heart, the bicuspid aortic valve, we have, I should pause. Do people know when I say a heart defect what I'm talking about? Bicuspid aortic valve. It's when the aortic valve, instead of having 3 leaflets, has 2. Coarctation means that the descending aorta is narrow. Some people in the room might have it. Coarctation occurs in 15%. Bicuspid aortic valve occurs in about 30%, 20%. And we do tend to think that that is more common with 45X, the typical type. But based on the chromosome type alone, we can't predict the issues which will be present. So if a mother has, if I meet somebody and they have their baby, Turner syndrome, and they tell me this is their chromosome type, I can't predict their future. I can't say, well, here's what you're going to be in for, this, this, and this. You know, there's no crystal ball there. If the baby has 45X, I would say you are more likely to have the bicuspid aortic valve and the coarc, but not necessarily. And so we automatically do the echo to check. Does that make sense, guys? And when we talk about other stuff, like the things that you can't see, learning disabilities, social issues, attention issues, it doesn't correlate directly. What you see on the outside, on the inside, it's hard to know. In fact, those things are just very common in all forms of Turner syndrome. And conversely, a person's outward appearance does not always predict the type of chromosome. So I want to acknowledge, see, I kept it as a short talk because I really want to be able to handle your questions, I want to thank the people that I work with in my clinic, Dr. Silberbach. These are my colleagues in my clinic, Dr. Levitsky and Dr. Hayes and Mrs. Collins. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back through the talk, let's see, and I'm going to give you guys a chance to stop me, and we'll go through this one by one, okay? So is there anybody here who thought that this was like, whoa, too overwhelming? Is there anybody who thought, I know it all. I'm going to go next door and see the cardiology talk. Because you're allowed to do that. The only bad thing about these conferences is that there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's okay with me if you want to leave, all right? Maybe I'll go next door and check it out. But I'm going to go through this one by one, and you're going to stop me and say, stop now. I wanted to ask you about this. So again, this is this very scientific diagram of a cell, nucleus, chromosomes. And open it up, unwind it, and here's this stuff called the DNA. And this is what we mean by base pairs. That's kind of scientific. But really, what does it do? This stuff on its own, it's like a computer program. And what it does, it tells the body how to make proteins. And proteins really determines whether your bones are growing or not, whether your heart is making something or not. It determines whether you're going to have enough estrogen, how your brain is being nurtured in fetal life. So this is like the cascade of how development happens. Does that make sense? So simple diagram there. Male, female, Turner syndrome. So you see how the chromosomes get shorter? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12 to 18, 22. So you see the big difference between 1 and 22? 22 is really small. X is actually a fairly large chromosome. So there's a lot of stuff on it. And one of the things I tell women when I'm talking to people for the first time to say, you're missing an X chromosome. You know, when you say that to somebody, you should feel, I can see the body language. Your shoulders slump. It's like, oh, you know, it makes you feel like you're half of something. But it turns out that typical women actually have one of their chromosomes, X chromosomes, is not functional. And it's because you can't have 2 X chromosomes working. It's too much. One of them inactivates. It's called inactivation. So one of them shuts down. So in fact, typical women basically have 1 X chromosome. And we know that's because the X chromosome is so powerful. So that's why it has to shut down. So, and you might say, but tell me why, Dr. Lynn, then why, if I have lost an X chromosome, why am I different from somebody who's 2? Because actually losing completely does affect what's going on this X chromosome. We feel that there are things that happen. It's not completely benign. It is obviously different from having 2 X's. Yes?
You said that it's not genetic, it's not something that can be
Passed along.
Kind of a random occurrence.
Just to say it's genetic, but it's not inherited.
Right. But my question is have you ever seen, and maybe there just needs to be more study on this, a situation where, you know, when you explained how there's the sperm and the egg, and either the egg or the sperm has to be missing
one.
Mm-hmm.
To fertilize.
Have you seen where that will have reoccur?
So the answer is it is known, and that is when a woman has Turner syndrome. So that's one area I didn't go all together, but we can do that. What if a woman has Turner syndrome and gets pregnant? And there are all sorts of chromosome mischief that can happen. The outcome can be, for some reason, they can have a variety of chromosome abnormalities. They can also have a child with Turner syndrome. But it turns out that when you have a conception of Turner syndrome, sperm and egg, most of the conceptions with Turner syndrome do not survive. So the women who have 45X who are here at this meeting, they're like survivors. They're the champions. It turns out that when you have 45X, the one thing that really hurts badly is the hemodynamic system. And so most of them are actually miscarried. Don't even know that. And so women who have Turner syndrome, it's one of the reasons to have caution about even thinking about getting pregnant if you have Turner syndrome is the outcome can be miscarriage, repeated losses. So that's a time when it is actually inherited, it is being passed along. Does that make sense?
It does.
It's such a rare instance, I didn't actually include in my standard talk, but thank you for asking. So let me just, yes.
For me, so the doctor says 80%, one X, but still 20%, I think.
Do you have mosaicism?
I think so.
Sounds like that. Do you have 80% 45X? Do Do you think you're like this? Let me go over here. Are you like this 80% X, 20% XX? Maybe. So when that happens, there's not very much difference between typical 45X.
How can, how can it, because, so some, it means some have, some not.
How did it happen? It happened that, do you remember that little picture I showed you? It means that as you were formed as an egg, as an embryo, you were formed as 2 X's. But some of your cells lost an X. And so you are a combination of X and XX. It sounds like most of your cells are 45X, 80%. And fewer, 20%, are the XX. So that's how it happens. You start out as, when you have mosaicism, you're different. It's not the fertilization of the Y and the egg and the sperm. It's different. You start out as XX and you've lost it. Thank you for bringing that up, because mosaicism starts out differently. Do you follow that?
Okay.
Yes.
So you're saying there are many different forms of
Chromosome types?
like Turner syndrome, you're saying?
Yes. I'm saying there's many different types of chromosome. See, I hate to use the word abnormality, but there are many different chromosome differences that result in Turner syndrome.
So you're saying the different ways of how the chromosome, how an individual can affect with Turner syndrome?
Yes. Do you want to share with me the type that you have? Do you feel, I don't want to embarrass.
I have classic.
Okay.
But I thought the 2 types were the classic and mosaicism.
So mosaicism is a general term. So mosaicism is a term for a whole mixture of things. Let me go back. So mosaicism is a general term. So this is mosaicism, X and XX, okay? This is mosaicism, X, XX, XXX. This is mosaicism, X and XY.
So some mosaic Turners have a Y?
They do. It's a very special type. It's very uncommon, but they can. Some people are mosaic for a ring. They have the XX and the ring, or they can have X. Actually, this is, oh, sorry about that, a little error there. This should just be 1X and a ring there too. Yes?
So the 146XS deletion P11 proximal deletion XP.
Yep.
It's the only one that I can tell that even reads like the geneticist told me, and I've asked her several times. And I still don't understand, because all the girls that I talk with Turner syndrome are saying, sounds like mosaicism. And I'm like, no, she said it wasn't. She said it's just, she said, this is how you explain it to people. She has Turner syndrome.
Is this your
my daughter?
Okay, yeah.
She has Turner syndrome, but it's a mild form of Turner syndrome. Because she has both X's, she's just missing the short arm of 1X. She said it's not mosaicism, it's not typical Turner's, it's a variant form. But it doesn't seem like a lot of the TS community knows that. They're category, 2 categories, TS or mosaicism. But actually, there's a lot more going on, I guess.
So,
Even when I go on the website for Turner syndrome, I can't find my daughters on there.
okay. So there are a couple things you're asking. Let me go through it together. If you're missing part of the short arm, it's called a deletion of XP.
And that's what it says.
Now, the deletion can come in 2 places. It can come close down, which is called XP11, or it can go further out, which is called XP22.
Hers is XP11.1.
There you go, so right there.
So this is its proximal deletion XP.
You got it. And it's Turner syndrome.
Turner
Yeah.
syndrome. She said, just explain it, it's Turner syndrome, but a milder form, I guess?
Yes and no. Some people are typical. It sounds like she must be mild. Do you consider her mild?
Oh, yeah, I guess, we
Yeah.
just found out, but she also has ectodermal dysplasia.
Okay.
So her features were taken over by ectodermal dysplasia.
I see. That makes sense.
So we didn't
Yeah.
know.
That makes complete sense. But
Yeah.
so you are correct in what you said. It sounds like you got it right.
Okay.
You're saying it right. No, it is XP deletion. It doesn't have to be mosaicism.
Okay.
And the second part is, you said, when you go on the internet, when you try to read about it, people seem to make it just two things,
Right.
either this or that, but now you can understand why. My goodness, it's taken me half an hour to explain it. It's really complicated. Just to let you know, I'm obsessed with this. This is my obsession. I'm doing research on it. For example, I see women who come to me from fertility clinic, and they have mosaicism of like maybe 18%, 12%, and the question is always, well, Dr. Lynn, is this Turner syndrome? And I say if you have reduced fertility, short stature, if you have any of the intellectual neuropsych, I say yes, it is. It's just a mild form. And so we're going to be discussing this at the symposium next week. In fact, tomorrow is in my session, we'll be talking about this. So we have not forgotten how important this is. I'm going to give somebody else a chance. Pittsburgh.
My sister has monosomy. Is that the 45X?
Yes,
So
yes.
that's just
Mono is just a fancy word of saying one, mono.
Oh, okay. So she is just.
Yep.
So the deletion one, the proximal deletion actually is when it's just the axis is missing a little bit of it.
You got it. Yep. Yes. Iowa?
No.
Ohio. Okay, accurate.
I would ask, kind of coming back to the question of heredity. So, if say like a family has a daughter with Turner, does that mean that because like say like her siblings were conceived from the same parent, could that mean that even though you said it's not necessarily inherited, but could that mean that like her brothers could pass on to like their daughters at all?
So based on the reassurance that I'm giving you, what do you think the answer is? Exactly. It's one of those things that happens in life.
Also, my doctor said the chromosome can change from time to time.
That's actually interesting. We have learned that 45X increases with a woman's age. Somebody should do my chromosome analysis. I might have 3%. We say that less than 5% occurs when you're older than 60 or 50, so I might have a couple. That's why I tend to think of Turner syndrome as sort of a variation of the 45X. 45X cells occur, they appear in women when they're older than 45. We think it's because it's sort of unstable.
That's my 20 years ago. Actually, I did my chromosome test in China. So, of course, it's 80% and 20%. Just this year, when I here in America, I do another test. I believe is 27% of
So a little bit, but just to let you know that that kind of difference is really just a slight variation in how we count them. Because what we're doing is we're sampling. You're taking blood, it's a sampling error. It's like a little standard. So that if you had said to me, it went from 80 and 20 to like 60 and 40, that would be a big jump. But to go to 27%, it's not that big difference. So who else has a question? Yes.
So on that topic of sampling, do you ever see big differences in those percentages between skin biopsies and blood tests?
What a great question. Just yesterday, I saw one of my patients who had a blood analysis that was 0 and 0. But the doctor kept thinking, she has classic Turner syndrome. Check the skin, 100%. I know, it's just fascinating. It just makes you understand something happens as these cells sort out in development. So yes, good question.
I would say, what is the difference between mosaicism and classic Turners? I don't know the difference.
Right, so the expression classic usually refers to this, 45X. Classic because it was the first type that was recognized. Classic because this is the most familiar appearance with the short stature, the webbing of the neck. But I don't always use that expression because you can see that typical appearance in girls who have mosaicism too. I'm sensitive to saying that because I'm the doctor up here, you're the people living with Turner syndrome. But I've asked people and I've said, as you are women living with Turner syndrome, do you look at each other? Do you say to yourself, I can see this kind of typical, so I think typical is a better word, or familiar appearance. And people have said to me, yeah, we're aware of it, we understand. So there's variation. Yes, back there.
My daughter has
I don't think so.
There would be any additional information that would come out of that.
No, but here's the information I will give you. The literature articles have said that this is the one more likely to be associated with intellectual disability. I would say don't believe that. I know I follow somebody who has a ring who has 2 PhDs. I know somebody else who has a ring who's brilliant. So do not believe that. Those kind of studies, I think there's sort of an ascertainment bias. Were you ever told anything like that?
The other thing they've just told me is that it's a rare form of something that's already rare. And to be honest, there's not a lot of information specifically on the ring chromosome, and I haven't gotten a lot of, actually I haven't gotten a lot of information at all, so.
Yeah. How old is your daughter?
3.5.
Yeah, so I would just say we would follow her like we would follow every child, see how she's doing, see what her strengths are. I'm very proactive with my patients in offering a neuropsychologic evaluation. I will be honest with you that that's not to be sort of doom and gloom. I just feel to be proactive, try to identify strengths and weaknesses, usually when they're a little bit older than 5, and just to see what their strengths are, weaknesses, being aware of some of the, the issues and stuff like that.
So, my daughter has ring X too. And one of the things I know they told me, like, part of the intellectual challenges had a significant, like it had to do with the genes that were lost when it broke apart, right? So, I mean, is that why that one specifically is called out often as?
Correct. You're right. When I showed you that little picture, I said that there's a bit missing and a bit at the end that's missing too. And so it's called a double deletion. So it's like saying, well, gee, you're missing 2 parts. But people with a ring X are all very different. It depends if, usually people with a ring X, you're always mosaic. You always have mosaicism. It depends on what other mosaicism you have, what your percentages are. And what we're sampling in the blood, we don't know what we're sampling in the skin or the rest of you. And so when somebody says, should we do a skin, you could. I don't think you need to. I would say follow the person in front of you, see how you're doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's the isochromosome. It's about 15%. In general, I would say that is this type here, generally a little bit milder, possibly. I would say, again, for everybody, I would say approach every child in the same way. We think about the heart, we think about the learning challenges, we think about the hormones, follow the growth. For everybody, all the same thing. Fine-tune it a little bit. As I said, for the isochromosome, these girls generally have a milder, just a little bit milder. Does that help? Yes. I tell you, this is what the guidelines meeting is all about. We are trying to decide whether we should fine-tune some of these recommendations. Can we save cost, save anxiety? We're not trying to make other people feel more worried, but can we fine-tune the approach?
So with mosaicism, there are 6 different types?
There are so many types. I'm just giving you a sample. There is every combination you can do. You can do X, XX, XXX. You could do X, XX, XY. These are just sort of samples. Mosaicism really means it's like totally a mixture. That's why probably when you go online to discuss it, you're not going to have this kind of an approach that I'm giving you. So you can have mosaicism with a ring, XX, and a ring X here. You can't have mosaicism with your deletions there. So for everything, you can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
So what happens with ring X chromosome?
So the ring X, if a person cannot have 100% ring X, that's one thing. It is such a potent, alone, it would be such a potent loss of material that nobody is a 100% ring X. You're always mosaicism when you have a ring X. I would, moms who have girls with ring X, I'm sure they're mosaic. They probably have either a cell line that's XX or just X.
So what is the definition of a ring X?
Do you remember the little picture I showed you? A ring X means,
Oh, they're missing something next to it.
It means that the one of the X's is missing a little at the top, little at the bottom. And what happens is, probably didn't explain this very well, the X chromosome, instead of living like this with 2 deletions, it finds itself and it hooks together. It's sticky. It's like a piece of candy. And instead of just living like that, it just finds itself and it sticks together and creates a ring.
This is why there's so many different varieties.
It really is. I mean, this is kind of a hard talk. I'm giving you it's called Genetics 101, but we've gotten pretty sophisticated, I think, in what I'm showing you. See, aren't you glad I did this? I gave you the quick overview, then we went back and we did it slide by slide. But you are the smartest parents right now. When you go out there, you're smarter than anybody else out there.
What do you mean the 2 arms, short arm and long arms? I confused.
Yeah, you know what? I apologize. I should have done that better. Let me go back to the very beginning, guys. Let's see. Whoops. Oh, dear. Let me just go home. Let's see, home. No, that's not working. So this is my fault. I should have done this better. So on a chromosome, this is called the short arm, the P arm. This little part here is called the centromere, the center. And this is called the Q arm. Down here, this is the P arm, the centromere, and this is called the Q arm. So when we have a deletion, it could be a deletion of XP or XQ. Does that make sense now? I'm sorry, I should have done a better job.
One more time.
Yeah. For a chromosome, the top part is called the P arm. It's from the French, petit. The person who described it was a French cytogeneticist, so he named it the short arm, petit. And the letter that comes after P is called Q. So he called this the long arm, the Q arm. And in between is called the centromere. Think of center. So let me show you a different chromosome here. It's hard to see the pinched in part here, but this is the P arm, the Q arm, and right there is the centromere. See if I can show you a different diagram. Just looking for another picture. Well, here we can look at this. This is the P arm. Here's the centromere, and here's the Q arm. Do you get that now? Okay. I'll put a picture of a chromosome when I give the talk again. Yes.
I'm talking about doing like repeat karyotype. So as an adult woman with trimester, I know my karyotype, but I no longer have access to that blood test. The only way I know it is there's a letter from my doctor in New Hampshire from like when I was 2 to my new doctor in Phoenix that has my karyotype.
Right.
On it. Would you recommend a repeat karyotype for someone like myself?
If you have a standard one, I don't think so. Do you have anything unusual? I don't mean to be too personal.
I think it was written 45X, 45XI, was what was written on the letter.
Right, so that's an isochromosome. It might be worth it just to document it. For my patients, I have to document it because I just keep track of everybody very precisely. For practical reasons, I don't think you have to. If it comes up for some other reason that you just want to know, you might want to do that. You know, we're a mobile population. People move around and you kind of lose track of that first one, and you might want to. There's not a good reason other than you might just want to document it for your record. Your brains must be fried by now. One more question? You are? Okay.
A little bit.
Tell me, could you mind telling me what your daughter has again?
It's actually my sister.
Sister, okay.
She has the 45X, right?
Okay, so that's standard.
So whenever you look at the chromosomes, I don't have Turner's. So are mine all long?
No, yours, we'll go,
Do mine get shorter too?
no, let's go back to the typical woman. So this would be you.
So mine
46?
is smaller.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. So this decrease in size is just the way they are.
Okay.
It's not like they're shrinking.
Okay.
It's not like material is being lost. It's just that's how they are.
Okay.
Questions are great. Questions help me understand what other people might be thinking. If one person is thinking this, other people, this is just how they are. Some are big, some are medium, some are short. And they put X down here just because they're the sex chromosomes. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, excuse my ignorance, but what, a karyotype, is that the same as the chromosome?
Great question. It's the same thing. Chromosome analysis. Chromosome analysis is the process of doing the karyotype. It's basically the same thing.
Because people always talk, oh, that's a very interesting karyotype, and I'm like, okay, what?
Right. So the karyotype is this on the screen, but the process is chromosome analysis. I think chromosome analysis is more plain speak than karyotype, right?
The geneticist didn't say karyotype.
Okay.
She's a little bit more layman terms, I guess.
Who else has a question? Yes?
Do these all part of the chromosome or X chromosome, they are lost post-conception or they can happen before that?
Well, no, that's a very good question. So mosaicism is post-conception. Other questions? And you can ask me some questions at dinner or whatever, because I know that you feel like you've got it all right now. It's like when you hear a lecture and then you leave and you think, oh, what was that thing she asked me? Thank you, guys. This was really fun. You were a really good audience. Every question was worthwhile. I mean, this is how a speaker learns to give a better talk the next time. And I don't know if this is the kind of meeting where you ask to give feedback. Do they ask you to give feedback? You know, letter rip. Let me know what I did wrong or right. It just will make me better the next time. So thank you. This was fun. And I'll see you guys later.